Greetings, my name is Sean Kershaw, and I'm the Director of Public Works for the City of St. Paul. Today we're here to talk about the outcome of the Capital City Bikeway Interim Design Study, including our recommendation for the western leg of the Capital City Bikeway. The Capital City Bikeway is more than a downtown bikeway. It connects to regional bike trails, including St. Paul's Grand Round, and it fills in gaps in the citywide bike infrastructure. It is a complex decision between two viable alternatives. We look both at St. Peter Street and at Wabasha Street options. Both corridors have impacts on businesses, economic development, parking, and the people who visit downtown, work downtown, and live downtown. This recommendation today is the outcome of a multi-year community engagement process. Before that, there was the Capital City Bikeway Network Study that was done from 2015 to 2017. The recommendation we're making is for Wabasha Street to be the western leg of the Capital City Bikeway. This allows for full build implementation of the bikeway more quickly. It maintains 2 travel lanes on the entire corridor. It provides a more direct connection to the river crossing, and there is support from some properties along Wabasha Street. We also think that there's more economic development opportunities on Wabasha Street. To walk through the details of this, including the history and the work we did, and more information on the recommendation and the options we looked at, I want to introduce you to Randy Newton, the city's traffic engineer.
Thank you, Sean. As Sean shared, I'm Randy Newton. I'm the city's traffic engineer, and I have been charged with leading the city's efforts on the Capital City Bikeway Interim Design Study. With this presentation, we wanted to go through the background and history of the Capital City Bikeway and the process we undertook that led to the recommendation for Wabasha Street. A little history on the Capital City Bikeway. The St. Paul Bike Plan was adopted in 2015. 2 of the main priorities of the bike plan were to develop a downtown bike network and to complete the Grand Round. The first step in developing that bikeway network were the completion of the Bikeway Network and Design Guide. That work was adopted in 2017, and the key outcome of that was determining preferred routes and alignment for the Capital City Bikeway and design standards for the full build of the bikeway. Since the completion of the Bikeway plan, the city has been working on the implementation of the Bikeway network. We started with the Jackson Street corridor on the east side of downtown, which was constructed in multiple phases between 2016 and 2018. The majority of this work was done as part of full street reconstruction. Last fall, we were able to implement the 10th Street corridor, and there's a remaining portion of that is yet to be constructed this year. With this work that we're doing and presenting today, we're recommending the Wabasha as the west corridor, and we're working on an implementation plan for that corridor. We also have taken major steps and secured funding for a couple segments of Kellogg Boulevard, which is the south leg of the Capital City Bikeway network, and plan to have those constructed in 2023 and 2025. This slide shares a couple of photos from the 10th Street implementation from last year and shows the interim design that was implemented. A couple key things with the Capital City Bikeway and how it furthers some of the main city goals and policies. Within the Bikeway plan, it identified that a network of facilities downtown, a bike network downtown, was a priority, and in particular, a network that calls for a safe and well-connected bikeway serving all ages and abilities. This is consistent with a couple of key city goals. First, it's providing safe and reliable transportation choice and removing the need for single occupant vehicle trips. Secondly, it's a step towards reducing our goal to significantly reduce the number of vehicle miles traveled in the city. 2 years ago, we began work on the interim design study process. With this work, there were 3 primary objectives. The first was to determine an interim design for the north corridor, which was 9th and 10th Street. That work has since been completed. The other 2 steps were to determine a preferred route for the west leg of the corridor, either St. Peter or Wabasha Street, and to determine appropriate design for that corridor. We will often be using the difference between interim and full build as we go through this. What we mean by interim is something that can be built within the confines of the existing roadway. The picture in the upper left is a picture from what we implemented on 10th Street last year. On the upper right, it's a picture of Pelham, which was another interim implementation several years ago. The full build design, which are the pictures on the bottom, are Jackson Street and show essentially a bikeway constructed as part of a full street reconstruction. Our process for the review of the west leg of the Capital City Bikeway was an iterative one. We started with the brainstorming a number of different route concepts, and ultimately pared that down to 5 initial routes that had a preliminary evaluation and ultimately were shared with the public at open house number 2. Through the feedback that we received at open house number 2 and our internal review, we ultimately pared that down to 3 primary corridor concepts that we reviewed in greater study. One was the St. Peter Market Street corridor, which was a 2-way bikeway along both sides, along the west side of both streets. The second option was the bikeway along the full length of St. Peter, which was maintained primarily 2 motor vehicle lanes along St. Peter, except for a stretch between 4th and 6th Street. And the third alternative was a revised Wabasha Street alternative that followed Wabasha Street from Kellogg to 10th Street and used the 10th Street bikeway to jog over to St. Peter to complete the crossing across the 94 corridor. Over the last 2 years going through this process, we've undertaken an extensive public engagement effort. This includes maintaining a project webpage, which includes a lot of information that we have shared throughout the project. We have had 3 public open houses with good attendance and that included follow-up surveys that people could take online to provide additional feedback on the process. We directly reached out and had conversations with a number of different stakeholders throughout the process. We also had an internal group that met several times to work through the technical details of the project, and we have made 3 presentations to the Transportation Committee. Through this process, we've heard a number of things. The following is a brief summary of some of the key highlights. First, we've heard that there is a preference for bikeways with physical separation from motor vehicle traffic. We've also heard a preference for 2-way bike facilities as opposed to 2 one-way facilities. In terms of use of the right-of-way space, sidewalks and sidewalk amenities were seen as a top priority. The use of loading zones and the need for loading zones and valet zones was an important concern for business operations. Loss of convenient parking is a concern that we hear on most projects we do, and was certainly another one that we heard on this corridor. We heard a concern over the traffic impacts of reducing St. Peter to a single lane, in particular the potential to block that single lane due to vehicles and delivery vehicles loading and unloading, as well as valet users. This was a particular concern during the event times that we experienced downtown. We also heard that there was support from some of the properties along Wabasha Street for the bikeway. We also heard and acknowledged that bikeway maintenance is very important, especially in the winter months. As part of our evaluation, we looked at a number of different factors. One of the things that we did was complete an evaluation matrix, which is available online, that shows some of the key differences between the corridors. What is shown here is a brief summary of some of those highlights that we identified. One of the key things with the Market Street alternative is that over 40 plus days a year, we'd expect the bicycle network to be interrupted due to special events. Another key difference was that the traffic volumes in Wabasha are 2 to 3 times higher than what you'd experience on St. Peter and Market. We did identify that Wabasha would have more vehicle and bike conflicts than either St. Peter or Market Street. And in regards to bike conflicts, that is the number of interactions between bikes and vehicles that would exist on a corridor. Do note with this one in particular that we do not think the number of vehicle-bike conflicts on Wabasha is particularly high or unusual for a bike network, and certainly is not a reason that we would not select a corridor. We identified that there is more parking loss on Wabasha than on either the St. Peter or Market Street alternatives, approximately 80 spaces versus 60 on St. Peter or Market. We note that with the St. Peter alternative, there is a direct connection to the north across I-94, and with the Wabasha option, there is a direct connection to the south across the river. We also did look at the full build in terms of what this would look like if the roadway was fully reconstructed. We did note that with a full build and the potential to go down a single lane, the St. Peter option offers more flexibility in the reconstruction of the roadway. However, we do note that that does assume that a single lane would be constructed and that there was a lot of concerns with how that would impact the traffic operations downtown. With the full build, and another consideration with the full build is that we note that Wabasha offers an opportunity for faster build implementation. Most notably, Wabasha is scheduled for reconstruction between Kellogg and 6th Street, and we anticipate the ability to fully build the bikeway through that stretch. Lastly, Wabasha offers more economic development opportunity with the implementation of the Bikeway. With these next slides, I'm going to walk through each of the alignments in a little bit more detail to provide more information on each alignment. First up is the St. Peter and Market option. This option is a two-way bikeway along the south side of 12th Street, along the west side of St. Peter and the west side of Market. Across the I-94 bridge at 12th Street and St. Peter would be reduced to a single lane. It also would result in the conversion of one block of Market Street to a one-way motor vehicle traffic. A couple of the features of the St. Peter Market alternative include that it retains the curbside space along the east side of St. Peter. It does result in a challenging connection between St. Peter and Market. We also note that the use of the Market Street convertible space is not compatible with the events that commonly are staged there. This slide shows some of the pros and cons of the St. Peter Market Street alternative. In regards to pros, the primary pros are that it avoids impacts to St. Peter south of 6th Street and that it maintains the parking and loading along the east side of St. Peter. One of the main cons of this alternative is the use of Market Street and its incompatibility with the Market Street convertible space that would require frequent closures of the bikeway. Also, I note that the poor connection between Market Street and St. Peter is another primary concern with this alternative. Moving on to the St. Peter Street alternative, this concept includes a two-way bikeway along the south side of 12th Street and along the west side of St. Peter. This reduces various sections of the corridor to a single lane. This includes 12th Street on the north side of 94, the crossing of I-94, and St. Peter between 6th Street and 4th Street. This concept includes the full removal of curb uses along the west side of the roadway, but retains all the curbside uses on the east side. As noted before, it reduces motor vehicle traffic to a single lane between 6th Street and 4th Street. This slide shows the pros and cons for St. Peter Street, which we ultimately deemed to be a viable alternative, but one we did not recommend. On the pro sides, this option maintains parking and loading zones along the entire east side of the corridor. It maintains two motor vehicle lanes along the majority of the corridor. There are less vehicle and bike conflicts than Wabasha, and it provides a direct connection to the north across I-94. In a full build option, there is more flexibility for the St. Peter option. However, this assumes that we would reduce the entire corridor to a single lane, which we also have concerns with. On the con side, the reduction to a single lane creates concerns with valet traffic, deliveries, and event traffic blocking up that single lane and creating congestion in an important part of downtown. There are also impacts to the Palace Theater loading operations as we remove parking along the west side of the roadway. There are some design constraints that we'd expect to have to deal with with regards to state aid and emergency vehicle access. These are things we expect to be able to work through, but they may affect how we would do the design. There's also the loss of parking, on-street parking, and the removal of bump outs that would occur with this option. Moving on to Wabasha Street. This option includes a two-way bikeway along the south side of 12th Street, the west side of St. Peter north of 10th Street, the south side of 10th Street, and the west side of Wabasha. Along 12th Street and across I-94, traffic would be reduced to a single lane of traffic. The bikeway would then jog along the 10th Street corridor to utilize Wabasha Street. The bikeway is recommended along the west side of Wabasha due to the bus stops that currently exist on the east side. Also note that Wabasha Street is tentatively scheduled for reconstruction in 2022. A couple of key features of the Wabasha Street include that there would be full removal of the curbside uses along the west side of the street, and as with St. Peter, all the curbside uses along the east side can be retained. It does maintain 2 lanes of traffic along the entire corridor, and as noted previously, a full build project is scheduled on Wabasha between Kellogg and 6th Street in 2022. This slide shows the pros and cons for the Wabasha Street alternative, which we ultimately are recommending. The pros of this include that it allows for earlier implementation of the full build bikeway along the southern segment of the corridor. It provides a direct connection to the south across the river. It maintains the parking and loading zones along the east side of the roadway. It's the alternative with the least number of overall traffic impacts. It has some support from the properties along Wabasha. and the implementation of the Bikeway would create more economic development opportunities. On the con side, we note that this does impact the parking spaces that the Amsterdam uses for their loading space for their events, and we will work with them to find a best solution for working through their loading needs. It also does impact the location the Children's Museum uses for loading, and the loss of that space will occasionally require a blockage of one of the through lanes on Wabasha. This option does have the most vehicle and bike conflicts, as previously shared. As noted, this is not a major concern, and we still believe this is a viable option. We don't note that the key location where this shows itself is the left turn conflicts from 6th Street, from Wabasha northbound to westbound on 6th Street. We also note the loss of vehicle parking on Wabasha, which is significant and directly affects a number of businesses. It also results in the removal of 8 bump outs. As Sean previously shared, this work ultimately led us to a recommendation of Wabasha Street for the west leg of the Capital City Bikeway. This was a challenging decision because we ultimately were able to determine 2 viable alternatives, with both alternatives having real impacts along each corridor. Ultimately, we recommend Wabasha Street because it allows for a full build of the implementation of the Bikeway sooner. It maintains 2 travel lanes along the entire corridor. It provides a more direct connection to the river crossing to the south. It has support from some properties along Wabasha Street, and there's more economic development opportunity with the Wabasha Street alternative. With the next few slides, I'll share a little bit more detail about the Wabasha Street alternative. Also share that concept layouts for each of the alternatives is available online. This is the northern section of the Wabasha Street corridor and shows the portion of the 1-lane segment of 12th Street north of I-94 as well as the I-94 crossing. It utilizes 1 block of St. Peter Street between 11th and 10th Street before jogging along the existing 10th Street Bikeway. This is the northern piece of the Wabasha Street alignment between 6th Street and 10th Street. It's intended that this would be, at this point, it's intended that this would be constructed as an interim bikeway. And we're still working on the schedule for the implementation of that segment. The following piece is the southern segment between Kellogg and 6th Street. And as previously shared, we would intend to build this as part of the full build reconstruction of Wabasha, which is currently scheduled for 2022. With this slide, I'd like to share a little bit more information about the Bikeway implementation costs and schedule. First off, at this time, the Capital City Bikeway on Wabasha is currently not funded or scheduled. This is our next primary task that we need to work on and address. Our current estimate for the Bikeway, as proposed, is approximately $2 million. Wabasha Street between Kellogg and 6th Street is tentatively scheduled for reconstruction in 2022. The design of the Bikeway and the additional costs associated with the Bikeway need to be incorporated into the project budget and timeline. Similarly, Wabasha north of 6th Street is tentatively scheduled for a mill and overlay in 2022. The design and additional costs associated with the Bikeway implementation likewise need to be incorporated into that project budget and timeline. We also note that the Capital City Bikeway network includes 3.5 miles of new protected bikeways within the downtown environment, and that additional maintenance funding is needed to appropriately maintain the Bikeway. As for project next steps, we are accepting comments on this recommendation until April 25th, 2021. The comment form to provide comments is linked to the project webpage. We've also tentatively scheduled a City Council public hearing for May 12th, 2021. Comments for the public hearing must be submitted in writing or by voicemail by noon the day before the public hearing, and we will be providing additional information for the announcement of the public hearing later in April. The City Council public hearing will be able to be viewed online. And lastly, as I previously indicated, one of the key next steps for us is to determine the project funding and implementation for the Capital City Bikeway. We thank you for taking the time to listen to this presentation, and we hope you take the time to provide your comments and feedback on this important recommendation. Thank you.